Hi, this is Mark Miller. I'm here with Rory Becker, CodeRush Evangelist Extreme over in the UK. Rory, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Mark. Yourself?
I'm doing great. I was looking through the forums and I noticed this post here. It's asking about CodeRush support in XAML. And at first it was a general question, does CodeRush support XAML? And the answer is yes, of course it does.
Indeed.
And then a little bit later, there's a question about a suggestion, like I want to be able to create rows and column definitions in XAML very quickly. And there's a link at the suggestion number. If you go over to that suggestion, it's essentially a question. I want to make a 5 by 5 grid, and I have to do all these rows of XAML code. What I really want to do is do it much faster. So I'm noticing here that the developers have accepted and the release to be determined in terms of improving this. However, CodeRush is extensible, so I thought, why not, let's go ahead and just do this now, answer the question, and create a feature. So to
Excellent.
do this, let's go over into Visual Studio. We need to, well, let's give you an overview, at least what I'm thinking about on this, Rory.
Sure.
I'm thinking we'll use the templates to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, you and I, Rory, we were talking about this yesterday, and I think it was your idea. You said you were thinking, hey, you know, it would be really nice if we could use dynamic templates,
Yeah.
and so we could type, for example, G for grid, and then 3, for example, the number of columns we want, or maybe the rows, whichever we decide is going to be first, and then a comma, and then another number for the number of columns or rows, whatever the one we didn't specify in the first number.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely nice and simple to remember that way.
Right, and just hit the space to expand that. So I think that's a good idea. So we'll use templates. We will use the dynamic lists, and then let's at least get started, and then from there we'll see where we need to go next. So
Sure.
so let's do this. Let's go in and say File, New. I just want to bring up create and bring up a WPF project to test and work with. I'm calling it WPF Application 1 for now. And we've got a grid on here. Let's actually just look at the code that we're trying to generate, get a sense of what that is.
Yeah.
So we come up here into the grid, and I will just create a couple rows and columns in here so we can kind of see what we're looking at for the code.
It's always good to get an example of what you're aiming at up front, because without that, it's a bit like development without tests. You can never be certain you've got it right, and you might go through all the development in the first place, and it'd be great, but not what you actually should have been producing.
Sure, that's a good point. All right, so I'm just going to take a look at just kind of do this to start with, and I've taken out the heights and the width settings just to kind of see, okay, so that's what it would look like there. So this is what the customer is looking to do. So let's cut this to the clipboard, and let's go into DevExpress options, and let's go into templates. Let's make sure our language is set to XAML. And there is a G template that we already have that kind of builds an empty grid for us. I want to create something new. I'm going to click this button to create a new category. I'm going to call this maybe our smart grid, for example. Click OK. I want to right-click this and just say move to root, so it's down in here.
Sure.
And then down inside of here, I want to create a new template. We'll call this GS for maybe Grid Smart. I'm just kind of making this up as I go along, Rory, by the way. If
Hey,
you're
that's cool.
like, if it's feeling a little sketchy to you, that's why. And then here's the template, right? So it's just going to spit that out right there. So if we do nothing else, then we'll get a template with 2 rows by 3 columns. So let's click OK on that at least. Oh, let's do one other thing. Let's look at here. You can see that the context here is use on empty line. So this will only expand in XAML, but it's got this context called on empty line, and so let's copy that context and come down here and let's paste that in so we have the same context for our GS template. So let's click OK on that. All right, and so now we can try that GS template, type in GS, hit the space bar, and there we go, we get the expansion. So there's our grid, but what we really want to do is determine the number of row definition calls and the number of column definition calls based on something that we pass in. And so I mentioned at the start that I wanted to use dynamic templates. What I really want to do is be able to type in something like GS for, and then comma, or GS then a 3, 4, or 3, 5, like that. In fact, I probably don't even need the S in there anymore. What I really want is this, G 3, 5, and I want it to just intelligently give me 3 rows and 5 columns. Okay?
That'd be good.
So that's where we want to go. So let's look back at the template and see how we can do that. So, so let's change this so that it uses the dynamic template format. So we do that, we rename the template, we pass in a variable name surrounded by question marks like this. So if I just use G followed by a number, for example, it'll take anything that's from the dynamic list called num, that's associated with the word num, and match it. So as an example, let's go over here into dynamic lists. I've got this under XAML, but let's switch over to neutral for a second. I've created a new dynamic list called numbers, and I'll show you how to do that. You just click on new here, you give it a name, whatever it's going to be, so I typed in numbers, and then you specify a variable. I specified the variable num, and then you can give it some kind of comment.
Okay, cool.
So I did this, I clicked OK, and then I added some entries to it. So I've got numbers, and I've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now all of these have a one-to-one mapping. Okay, so this is the piece that will show up in the template, and this is the value associated with this. Normally, though, you don't have this kind of one-to-one mapping. Normally, it's D stands for a dictionary, or KVP stands for a key-value pair. But there's nothing that stops you from doing this. So if I want to add a few more, I can just come down here. I can say mnemonic is 6, add that. Mnemonic is 7, add that. Mnemonic is 8, add that. And so here I can build the numbers 0 through 9 in numbers. The variable name is num. So that's the key part right there. Let me click apply, and we'll come back over here into templates, and then we'll switch back over here into C#. By the way, that, or not C#, I mean XAML. Let me go back to XAML. By the way, that click to apply, Rory, is not necessary. I could have kept working and then clicked OK.
Sure, yeah.
But you know how I am. I'm a little bit, nervous about this stuff. So let's come in here. Let's add a comment. When I say nervous, I guess I should say anal retentive about wanting to save. And
I've developed similar habits of saving things every 5 seconds. It was down to my use of Visual Basic 6 back in the day, and I would save things literally every 5 seconds because it was that unstable. It's now a nervous tick I can't help.
Sure, and I the same thing, right? It's a snowstorm right now. We lose power, that sort of thing. So at any rate, let's insert a string provider here. There's a string provider called get, and we'll click OK, and we're going to pass in there the word num in parens to it, and we'll just keep what we have here, and let's expand this. So I've got G followed by num, and let's see what happens. So we'll click OK. We'll come down here. Now we're going to say G5 and hit the space bar, and check it out. The number 5 shows up.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So this is, we're getting close, right? We're getting close, but here's the thing. If we want to specify 2 of these numbers in the name, put like, for example, a comma and another num here, well, we're going to have a problem because it's the same, it's going to be the same thing, right? Which is the value that we're going to get?
Yeah, well, we're trying to use the same variable for 2 different purposes, aren't we?
Exactly. I just want to try it because I'm curious to see what happens. So now if we type in G5, nothing should happen because it doesn't match. But if we type in G5, 4, and we hit the space bar to expand it, it will match. But look, the 4 has replaced the 5. Right? You see that? You see what happens? The 4 is the one that is now assigned to the value num. So let's go back in the options here, and I'll show you how you can change that. CodeRush has a really neat trick that it lets you do. If you want to specify a dynamic list showing up more than once in a template name, you can simply just add a number to the end of it. And then you'll get unique entries here. And so now we can put get me num1, and then right after that I can say get me num2,
Good stuff.
like that.
I've seen that trick used elsewhere as well. You've got that in the aliases and things for the regular
Exactly.
expressions.
It also is in the aliases, right? So if you know, I don't know if we're ever going to do a show on aliases, Rory. That's like, you know, kind of deep in the dark bowels of CodeRush. Or, well, actually, CodeRush doesn't have bowels. It's like a machine. But anyway, let's click OK on this.
Very well-oiled machine.
Yeah, well-oiled machine without bowels. So let's go G3, 5 and spacebar to expand. It matches the template.
Magic.
There you can see 3, 5. So not bad, right? So far.
No,
next we need to essentially repeat this a certain number of times. Same here. Now we don't have anything in CodeRush that does this yet. So let's just save this project. Let's now go in and create a plugin that does this. So we'll say DevExpress new plugin. And I'm going to call this, what I want is essentially something that loops through a number of times. I'm going to call this CR loop. I pretty much always just accept all the defaults here. Just click OK for those default settings. And we've got our plugin. This is the design surface for the plugin. Let's click on the toolbox over here. Click on the design surface so we can see what controls are available to us here. And what we want is a text command. So text commands are essentially bits of functionality that can be called from templates and other CodeRush features that deal with manipulating code in a document. So we'll create the text command. We'll go over and we'll change some of its properties. We'll call this txt-cmd loop. The command name will be loop. And the description will be calls a specified template a specified number of times. So when I use that word specified, that means I'm going to be passing parameters to it. And you can set up parameters here. And so we wanted 2 parameters for this. One is we want the count, and it's going to be of type integer. And the description here is going to be the number of times to loop. And then we want another one called template. And this is the template to expand multiple times, something like that, or once for each time pass through the loop. Once for each pass through the loop, or once through each iteration. Yep. And so these are both not optional. They're both required, right? So they're optional is false for both these. And so count is first, template is next. So we'll click OK on that. Then we'll come over here and we'll double click on the execute event. And inside here, we're going to grab those parameters, and you can get them from the text command itself. With this, we just specify count, like that, dot value as int. Use declare local to get a new integer value there. We're going to call this count. And then we want to also come in here and grab dot value as string, but I want to pass in template here. Use declare local to get that type and declare it. And this will be the template that will expand. And now we've got our counter. We can now do a for loop. And inside the for loop, we want to go into CodeRush dot templates dot expand template, and we want to pass in the name. That'll be just template there. And one other thing we want to do on this, Rory, let me just select that. I'm going to embed it in a try finally. I just hit the letter F to embed it in a try finally block there. Up here, I want to come in and I want to say CodeRush dot source dot begin update. And begin update is used, here's the hint for it. It suspends parsing if you plan to make several repeated changes to the code, which is what we're doing here. And I'm just escape to jump in there, and we'll change begin update into end update. Like that. And let's see, let me look at that code. So that's not bad, okay? There's one other thing that I think might be useful, and that, you know what though, let's maybe stop here. We'll get to that second useful thing in a bit. Let's run it and see what happens. All right, let's open up WPF application 1. All right, so what did we just do? We just created a text command called loop. Let's exploit that. So we'll go into DevExpress options. For row definitions, instead of having the specified ones, what we'll do is we'll come down here and we'll look for a loop in our commands list. There it is right there. And inside of loop, we're going to pass in 2 parameters. One of the parameters is how many times do we want to loop. So we'll make the first parameter be the number of rows, and the second one be the number of columns. So there we're, see what we're doing, Rory? We're getting the num1. That's the value that matches to the first piece right here. That's going to correspond to the number of rows. And then after that, we're going to now call a particular template, which I'm about to create. I haven't created yet. I like to, I call these like system templates, templates I don't really type in the editor, but still templates nonetheless that we can expand because they're called, and I like to put pound symbol or the hash symbol in front of them and behind them. So I've just typed those 2 in, and we'll call this row def. That's what we'll call this. I'm going to cut this to the clipboard, and I'm now going to create this row def right now. And then I'm going to just paste this. There's my row definition. Paste it back in. Okay? So there's row def. And then I'm going to come down here and get number 2 and pass in column def, call def, we'll call it that. And call def is just going to contain this. I'll cut that to the clipboard. Okay? All right, so that's what that looks like. Let's go in here. We'll duplicate this and call this call def, COL. Okay, and fix this so it expands to this. Okay, so now, right. So you know what I just realized, Rory, is I had cut this first piece off to the clipboard, but I kind of like it, so let's do that. So there we are, rows and columns. And I'm just, realizing that this is maybe backwards a little bit on this. Normally you do X and Y, and we're kind of swapping them a bit. So maybe what I should do is actually make the second parameter be rows and the first parameter be columns. And then that way it'll be kind of X and Y's, and it'll make sense. Kind of follow that convention. Okay, so let's click OK and see what happens. All right, and you know what I want to do is I want to actually set a breakpoint here so we can kind of step through this and see what's happening in the code. All right, so I'm going to type in G3, 5. So I want 3 columns, 5 rows. All right, so the loop command is seen in there. We'll go ahead and step through this. So here, count is 5. Template is row def. Call source begin update. And for each one of these, we're just going to simply call templates.expand template. And then at the end of that, we go to end update. Let's go ahead and run it. I think we're going to get one more breakpoint. There's the second one. We'll step down through that. This time count should be 3. There it is. And the template should be the other one, call def. And then let's run it. And so what do we see? We see 5 rows, 3 columns. And then if we look up here in the grid, you should see it. There it is, right there. I almost want to say we're done. That's what I almost want to say. Let's do this. Let's remove that grid we just built, and let's talk about how we might expand this. Right now we have something that's kind of useful, right? We have this loop text command that we just added. We could use this to create, for example, dashed lines of a certain length, right? Now we could, create a template that puts out a single dash character and say, now give me, this many of those, for example. So we have this looping ability now, which is pretty cool. The other thing is just to review this. In fact, actually, I think it'd actually be really good to kind of review and take a look at the steps that got us here. Right? There are two things that we did. One of the things we did is we created a new, we created a new template, and we made use of the dynamic lists, where we just referred to a variable, the dynamic list. In fact, we had two of them on the same line. The dynamic lists are in core dynamic lists. By the way, this page is an advanced page, so you won't see it unless your level down here is set to advanced or expert. Okay? So on the dynamic list, we switched over into neutral, and we created, and the reason we did neutral is because these numbers apply to all languages. And we just created a new dynamic list with the numbers 0 through 9. So, by the way, if you wanted to create something that allowed numbers beyond this, you'd either have to add them here to the list, or you'd have to create your own dynamic list programmatically, which Rory and I will not show you now, but if people do have questions about how to do this, you can ask them on the forums or send an email to Rory or myself. My email's markm@devexpress.com, and Rory's is roryb@devexpress.com. So we created that dynamic list, and that was essentially it. With the templates, let's go back over to the XAML side of things. On the templates, we created this template and these other two system templates that we called from it, and that's how we were able to build it. So the thing I'm thinking, Rory, is, okay, so what about if you want to actually make reference to that iterator number, right? As we iterate through and we're building these, we might want to do something like put that in, like if we were creating a name or something, a named control or a number of named controls, for example, we might want to increment the name of that control by a certain value each time. So let's say we want to do that. So we'll click OK to close this down, and then we'll shut down this instance of Visual Studio, go back to the one we're running from, close this down. All right, so I've got my design surface here. Let's go over to the toolbox, and now let's find a string provider. We'll drop that on the design surface. So a string provider simply returns a string, which is useful inside of the templates. In the last template we created, that get string provider was a string provider. Okay, so that get piece that we saw that returned the value associated with that num1 variable, it was a string provider. So let's do this. Let's first fill out some properties here. We'll call it we'll give this a name of call it loop counter, loop iterator variable name value, loop iterator value, loop iteration value, something like that. All right, and gets the value of the counter count for the loop text command. Okay, so these kind of are connected to each other, which makes sense that they're on the same plugin. And let's give this a good name. We'll call this stir loop iteration value. And now we'll go over to the events, and we'll double click on get string. And down here, what we want to do is we want to go into event args. We want to set the value equal to, and I want to do something like counter dot to string, like this, something along those lines. Now counter doesn't exist yet, so let's drop a marker here. We'll come back in a minute. Let's set counter right up in here. We'll say counter is equal to I, like that, and here we'll say counter is equal to 0, and we will also set it to 0 at the end. I'm not sure if I want to set it to 0 at the end or not, because at the end it might be useful to know what the full count is on that. Let's declare this as a field, and we can jump back to where we were. And you know what I'm thinking on this, Rory? I'm thinking it might be nice to be able to pass in an offset to add to this value, because this is going to go from 0 to, you know, whatever that, the number of times -1. And we might want to add a number to that. So I'm going to go into parameters. Sure. And I'm going to create a new parameter. We'll call it offset, and give it the description, the offset to add to the counter value, like that. And this time we will make it optional. We'll give it a default value of 0, and the type will be an int. Okay? So it's optional now, so it's not needed. And then back in our event handler, we can go grab that using similar techniques to what we used before, using the parameters, passing in the offset, that's string specified, dot value is int, and declare a local for that, call this offset, and it's going to be counter plus offset and to string. And that's it. Because we specified, here, let me bring that dialog up so you can see it. Because we specified in the parameters that it was optional, optional is true, if it's not specified, this value will be used. Default value is 0. Okay, so if nobody specifies anything, offset will be 0, which means it will have no effect. Now let's run again. And then we can test this by changing our template to make use of the new string provider. All right, let's open up WPF application 1. All right, so now what we want to do is make use of that counter. And so let's do this. Let's go in to DevExpress options. All right, so let's look at, for example, let's go into row def, and inside row definition, let's put a comment in here that makes use of that string provider we just created. So we'll right-click here, we'll choose Insert String Provider, and I'll type in loop iteration value. There it is right there. All right. Okay, so we've got loop iteration value, and then we'll finish up the comment there. And let's just see what that looks like when we expand it. All right, so let's do it. We'll do G 5, 5. Okay, we should also test out that offset also to make sure the offset is working as we're expecting it to. So, you know, one of the things that, you know, might be interesting to explore is what happens if we want to, you know, add some attributes to these column definitions and the row definitions, for example, height and things like that. You know, so far we've kind of got the essence of this, Rory, but it's not quite what I would call like a finished product yet.
So Mark, when we expanded the template last time, I noticed that the comments that were being produced for each of the row definitions were appearing on a different line to the row definitions themselves. Right. I was wondering, is that a factor of the editor?
It is kind of. What happens is after we expand this, we then go to the language service and we say reformat. And so the language service is actually putting it down on its own line. That's what's happening here. So. Okay, cool. All right, so let's go ahead and test out that offset value. So we'll pass it a 1 in there, and instead of seeing numbers going from 0 all the way to the end, we're expecting to see 1 through 5 instead. So let's do that. We'll say grid 5, 5. And there we go, we see 1 through 5. So the offset is working as well. So we're not stepping through the code, but we're seeing evidence that it appears to be working. So the last steps of this, I think, are to make this work a little bit better. If I make this a little more professional. So if I just use the G template and expand that, I get this, where I get the X name equals grid, and I have the grid 1. And notice I have the field around it. When I hit enter on the field, it puts the caret inside. It's very easy to work with, right? I can make a change, hit enter, and then I'm inside of the code ready to work. So I suggest we do something similar. I suggest we go into that grid template that I just expanded here, which is this. We'll go ahead and copy this piece right here to the clipboard. And we'll come down over here and we will paste that in. So we can specify a good name for that.
Yep.
And then the other thing is, since we are using fields, it might make sense inside of our column definitions and our row definitions. Here, we'll get rid of this piece right now, for now. So what we'll do in here is we'll actually let's drop a field here. So we can just stick a field right there for our column definitions, and then we can do the same thing here. We can drop a field in here as well. And that'll get us through all the fields. And then back for here's the expansion. So the expansion will start up here. There's what the caret will be. We'll go through all of these, and then I think our last target location should be right here. So we'll call this the final target. Right there. That'll be at the end of our column definition so that we can actually put content inside of here. So let's try that, see how that works. So we'll do a grid that's a 2 by 3. We'll give it a name, you know, my super grid. Hit enter, and now I'm in here for the row definition. If I want to specify the height here, I can do that. Height is equal to, like, say 33. Hit enter. Come down here, say height is equal to 22. Hit enter. Height is equal to something else, star, whatever, like that. And I can come down here and do the same thing right down here. Width is equal to 33 star. Width is equal to 33 star. And something like that. Actually, we should change that to 66, 67, something like that. And so we've specified it. So I think that's pretty good. And the last one, I hit enter, and it takes me down right in here. So I'm now able to put the new content in here. So at this point, I think we're pretty good. The only thing we really need to do to make this professional is remove this bit right here. So I'm going to call this, Rory, I'm going to call this tech support feature request closed. Stop the presses, kids, as fate would have it. After I stopped recording that show with Rory and myself, guess what? I was tweaking the templates and decided to make a few more changes. So let me show you the changes I've made and what I'm about to do. So let's go back into DevExpress options right here. A couple things. One is I put call def and row def inside its own system folder. I like to do this just kind of keep those things out of the way. If you're exploring these templates, you can see the references and then go out and find them in here, or search for them up in here just by typing in that template name if you want to find them. But I like keeping the system templates out of the way. The other thing is inside of those, I decided to go ahead and add width equals and put fields there and just put a star there by default, and also height equals there for the row definition. So I made those two changes. I also added one more template. So we have this convention in the CodeRush templates where if you have just you have a template and you have another template with a comma at the end of it, well, that comma is a shorter version of that template. So here, for example, the G template by default will give me this X name equals and allow me to fill in the name of the grid. A G with a comma will give me a nameless grid. So sometimes these are useful. So same thing here, stack panel gives me a name, an SP with a comma at the end gives me just a simple stack panel without any name. So that's our convention. And in looking at this, I realized that the name that Rory and I came up with this, we had number 1 followed by a comma followed by number 2, kind of collided with that other convention. The derivation of this format is essentially from the generic templates that take 2 parameters. For example, to create, for example, a dictionary. Let me go in and I'll show you that. All right, so let's say we're inside the class. We want to declare a new field. We can type in N for new, D for dictionary, and put a dot to indicate generic. And then the first type, I for example, followed by the second type, S. So I for integer, S for string. And then we can hit the spacebar to expand that out. So that's the use of the comma right there. We're creating declarations for generics that take two parameters, such as a dictionary. So that's kind of what was both in my mind and in Rory's mind when we were first thinking about this. However, when we really think about grids, we're really thinking about a 2x3 or 2x4. We're using the X to delimit the dimensions. Using the comma makes sense in the case of a dictionary so that we know where the delimitered pieces are, because the pieces on either side are going to be letters. For example, I, comma S that we saw before. We did in the template before, new dictionary, I, comma X, S. So we can't use a letter there to delimit because we just don't know where to stop, right? Where one starts and one stops. However, in the case of a grid, we do, because it's numbers, right? There won't be any collision. So what I really want to do is I want to change the template so that instead of using a comma, instead of doing 2, 4, I'm going to do 2x4, like that. And I think that's going to be a lot easier to remember and a lot easier to type in, and I think it's just going to make a lot more sense. It's going to be more intuitive to learn. So let's make that change. I'll show you how easy it is to change that. So we're going to DevExpress options, and all we have to do is change the name of the template. So we'll come right in here, we'll click that twice, and we'll change the comma to an X, and we'll do the same thing down here with this other template as well, like that. So we now have two of those there. Now we have one ending with a comma, the other one not, and now we don't have that visual collision. So now when we type in G2X4, like that, or G2x4, we should see the template expand, and we should see that there we have 2 columns by 4 rows. And there you can see the visual up there at the top, and we can just hit enter on these fields or specify something different for them if we want to. For example, 33 here and 66 there, for example. All right, so now I declare that we are done, and I hope you enjoyed this tech support answer. Thanks for watching, and thanks for choosing DevExpress.